I think most of us, if not all of us, remember our first albums for subgenres of metal. Now, some of us may be a little foggy on some of the genres, but I could say that for out of 3 of the 4 genres I'm going to talk about today, I remember 3 of them like it was no problem. So that's what I'm going to do today. Talk about my first metal albums for traditional style, thrash, death, and black metal. To start off, let's go with traditional because, well, that's the kind of metal I got into first, and I think that's everyone's first step into metal. Now, the first album, actually, it's too far back there. That's okay though. The first traditional metal album that I got into was Iron Maiden's "Somewhere in Time." Now, I was still getting into metal at the time when I started listening to this album. And for the most part, I would just listen to individual songs. It wasn't until I discovered this album when I wanted to hear it all the way through. Because this album, I think this is the best Iron Maiden album. I know everyone talks about Number of the Beast, and, well, that's really the one that everyone says is the best album. And even though that is such a groundbreaking, amazing album, I still usually, not always, but I usually skip the song Gangland. To me, that's not a good song. I'm sorry. I've tried to listen to it countless times, and it's not very good, in my opinion. I don't know, just something doesn't feel right. It's just a song where if it comes on, I can instantly skip it. But with Somewhere in Time by Iron Maiden, those songs are great. This is also when they started to introduce synthesizers into their music, which honestly I think sounds really cool. You know, they also did the same thing on their next album, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which is also a phenomenal album. Phenomenal album. I like Somewhere in Time because it also has, I think it has the best production sound out of the Maiden discography. It's got such a unique and kind of futuristic but retro sound to it, if you know what I mean. Especially on the drums, I think those are the best, like, production-wise, best drum sounds ever. It sounds so cool, and the guitars are definitely one of a kind. This is one of those albums that it came out at a perfect time, and it had the best production. I mean, I know there's been better productions, like, technically later, but this is, to me, like, the best album when it comes to production. This, AC/DC's Back in Black, though that's not a metal album, that's why I'm not really talking about it that whole much. There's been other good production albums that I really like. Kill by Cannibal Corpse. So, there's tons of great ones out there, but this is one I can always look back and be like, that right there, that sounds good. So, oh yeah, one more thing though before I go on to my next genre. I'm only going to talk about these albums for like a couple minutes at a time. If I were to talk about these in depth, they would be full-blown reviews, and that's not what this is. This is just kind of like, hey, here's my first albums. So that's why I'm not going to be going into such detail as I perhaps normally would be. I might bring back album reviews, by the way. Now, thrash metal. Thrash metal, I'm actually a little foggy on the details, because there are 2 albums in particular that I think were my first. They're by the same artist. I just don't know which one it was. There was even, like, another one. But the 2 I remember being, like, my first, so to speak, my first thrash metal albums were either Master of Puppets or Kill 'Em All. Oh man, that was a good one. Do I need to say anything about Master of Puppets? I mean, it's been hailed as as the greatest album of all time. I don't know if I would put out the greatest, but it's definitely one of the greatest. And then Kill 'Em All. Kill 'Em All has such a raw and I love that. I love that sound, and you know what Metallica did for thrash metal was very revolutionary. But Kill 'Em All, especially, it may have been Kill 'Em All when I really started getting into Metallica. Phone. I was listening to it on things like Pandora, through my own iPod at the time. So that's kind of why I think it's Kill 'Em All. But at the same time, I do remember just listening through Master of Puppets and just being blown away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded so. Okay, this is pissing me off. I love how raw this album sounds. Like when you talk raw albums, this is almost as raw as it gets, and I think that's why I really love Kill 'Em All so much. I mean, James Hetfield sounds totally different on this album than he does, well, especially now, but even on their second record. This is like totally different, which isn't surprising considering that he kind of had to take up singing for their first album, and it just went on from there. So, easily, I think this might even be my favorite, I think this is when he's at his best. And that's, I kind of wish they had this more of a raw sound on their next few albums. Because I love James's voice so much on Kill 'Em All. That's not to say that his voices on the other records are bad. It's just, I really like that raw sound to it. And of course, I mean, Master of Puppets. I don't skip songs on either of these albums when I listen to them. And when I go out for a long drive, maybe like 45 minutes to an hour or so, Master of Puppets is usually a contender to be thrown on and just listen to all the way through. Because it's that, Disposable Heroes, Leper Messiah, Damage Incorporated, the title track. You can't go wrong with any of these. Sorry, I got a bit ahead of myself and started stuttering too much. But anyways, I'm just too excited. I'm talking about awesome albums today. It's amazing. But, yeah, Metallica, even though they get a lot of crap nowadays, some of it's deserved, some of it isn't. One last album I should mention for thrash metal, though, was Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good by Megadeth. Megadeth is a phenomenal thrash metal band, even though I kind of feel like they're teetering on being like a progressive metal band, but that's just me. I think that was also one of my first metal albums, because I remember like it was yesterday too. My dad threw on the Big Four concert. This is when they were in, it was like somewhere in Europe, and it was Slayer, Metallica, Anthrax, and Megadeth all playing at the same show. And he showed me that, and that's one way I got into more metal as well. But, like, seriously, phenomenal album. Can't go wrong with any of those three. So, moving on to the next, because I'm a stuttering mess. Now, death metal. Death metal. I never thought I would get into death metal, by the way, in the first place. I don't think anyone thinks that when they first hear it. But I remember it was after like one of my practices or something, and my dad threw on Amon Amarth. Now, he didn't throw on a typical album. He actually threw on the bonus tracks from Deceiver of the Gods. That's when they kind of did a style of Judas Priest and Motorhead. And they had they weren't covers of songs, but they sounded just like, maybe not just like, but they sounded, they were definitely under the influence. That's what it was called, by the way. Under the influence of, those certain bands. And I listened to it, I was like, okay, sounds pretty good. I should check out a full album. And the first death metal album I listened to all the way through was Twilight of the Thunder God by Amon Amarth. I remember listening to this album for the first time like it was yesterday. I was in my room, and from that first track, Twilight of the Thunder God, all the way to Embrace of the Endless Ocean, done. I was a fan right there. That was seriously such a brutal, awesome, amazing record. I can listen to that album night and day, and in fact, there was the time where I did listen to that night and day. I listened to it at least once a day. Twilight of the Thunder God, I think is the perfect. If you want to get into death metal, I think that's a fantastic death metal album to get into because it's melodic death metal, but there's also a good mix of just kind of traditional death metal, not in the way of Cannibal Corpse, but maybe in a little more way of Morbid Angel. In a way, that's what I think personally. This album blew my mind. I mean, I couldn't believe how fast they were playing, and I couldn't believe the singer's vocals. He sounded like Thor. You know, that's one reason why I really love Amon Amarth so much too, is that their connection with Norse mythology and how they just love all these stories and stuff. And that they kind of, because I've always been into mythology and stuff like that, so that really helped to get into Amon Amarth. And you know, even though they're not teachers, they're not teaching us stories, but they're telling us, you know, good famous stories about like Ragnarok, about, you know, Thor's death and all that stuff. And that really helps. And especially if you're into that kind of stuff, you've probably already checked out Amon Amarth already. I personally can't think. I mean, that's one of those albums. Not a bad song. I don't skip any of it. Just let it go right through, and after that, you know, I might even listen to something else by Amon Amarth. But that was my favorite, and it didn't feel. How should I put this? I wasn't sure about the vocals of death metal for a long time because, like, it sounds cool, but I also, this is when I kind of cared about what they said, or no, maybe that's not the right way. I kind of cared hearing the lyrics a little more. Like I cared more about hearing the lyrics, and so I could, you know, I don't have to look at a lyric sheet, and then, you know, then I know the lyrics of the song. Amon Amarth, though, is actually a little bit easier when it comes to the growling. It's a little bit easier to hear and understand, and if as you know, when you listen to death metal more and more, it just gets easier and easier as you go on. So that's one thing I would also say about, like, easiest vocalists to listen to. Johan Hegg from Amon Amarth, Chuck Schuldiner of Death. Let's see who else. Chris Barnes, not Chris Barnes. That dude is so low on the ratio that you can't understand what he's saying. But yeah, as I went on, I stopped really caring about what singers sound like and say. Maybe not. This is kind of like a weird. I don't have the right wording for it. I think you know what I mean, though. I mean, like, now I listen to Mortician. Like, you don't even know what he's saying. He can literally just be like grunting the whole time, which I'm pretty sure he is, and it's still an awesome song. So yeah, that was my first death metal album, Twilight of Thunder God by Amon Amarth. Now, when it comes to black metal, the first album that I listened to was black metal. That was black metal, I should say. Was De Mysteriis Dom Satanis by Mayhem. Yes, the kings of black metal. These guys. Well, first of all, let me back up a bit. So it was a lunch hour, when I was still in school, and I was like, you know what? I kind of want to listen to some more Mayhem because, like I said, when it comes to like getting into something, I like to check out a few songs first before I listen to a whole album. That kind of like helps in a way, especially if I want to listen to a particular album. I'll listen to a couple songs from that album and I'll listen to it all the way through. And that's kind of how I've always done it. And the two songs I remember mostly were Funeral Fog and Freezing Moon and Life Eternal. Three songs, not two. Those I remember hearing those songs like, wow, this is like an incredible tone. It sets the atmosphere perfectly. I'm gonna check it out. But there was one problem. It wasn't cold out yet. And you might be thinking, really? Does it really matter what kind of weather you're listening to black metal in? Not really. But for me, black metal sounds best in the cold and in the dark. But thankfully it was pretty cold one day later, because I live in a state where the weather is bipolar. And I listened to that album on my off hour, and that was a life-changing record. Just like Twilight of the Thunder God, it blew my mind. I loved every moment of it. I loved the atmosphere it set. I loved the vocals, the guitars, and how like the guitars in a way were kind of in the background too. Like it was such a bizarre and amazing experience that, you know, when people might ask, what was if you could listen to one album for the first time again, what would it be? I would be really torn between Somewhere in Time and De Mysteriis Dom Sathanas, because, man, that album was incredible to listen to on the first time. You know, when I get into bands, it can be very easy to just kind of, you know, I think a lot of people when they listen to bands, they're doing something else, like driving. So yes, they still have the music playing, but they're not really focusing on the music. When I like to listen to bands, I like to sit down, kind of like this, put on a good pair of headphones, and listen to the music and really sit there and take and just soak it all in. And that's what I do, especially for black metal, because black metal is become one of my favorite subgenres in metal, and it's something to behold. This is not something that I don't really want to drive around to listening to. It's not that, you know, because I don't feel like I'm giving it the proper attention that it deserves. And that's why whenever I do listen to black metal, it's the best time to sit down, soak it all in. And that's what I did for Mayhem, and I could not be happier. Mayhem, if you've not checked out my Mayhem De Mysteriis Dom Sathanas review back from October of 2017, I believe. Yeah, wow, I've been doing this for about a year and a half now. Cool. You'll understand a little more of the history, and since I already talked about it, you could just check that out there. But I wanted to give like a brief overview of this album again, because one of my personal favorite albums too. It's a fantastic record. Please check it out. If you want to get into black metal, I suggest that's a good starting point. Well, I know this video was kind of all over the place. I had a lot to say, and I have a little bit of fun making it, so yeah, that's gonna do it for this time. What were your guys' first metal albums? How long have you been listening to metal? Have you been around for decades, or have you been around only for a few years? I'd love to know, so please, let me know down in the comments.